Compared to neighbours like Vietnam and Thailand, this landlocked country of Laos still really isn't on the tourist map. That's largely because of the government's old policy of isolation, as well as exorbitantly high visa charges and restrictions on what tourists could do once they did get in. All that, however, is changing fast. Less than 5 million people live in Laos, a country of over 230,000 square kilometres. That's about the same size as the United Kingdom, with its equivalent population of almost 60 million. Laos is still one of the world's poorest countries, with gross domestic product last year coming to just $1.7 billion, and with an average income of less than $400 per head. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Laos has been stretched for both aid and investment. Like most countries desperate for quick cash, tourism is an easy target.
It's developing very quickly. Go back 5-6 years, and there was almost no tourists there, and almost no tourist infrastructure, and that's all developing very, very quickly because the Lao government does need foreign exchange, and it sees this as being one way of getting it, and getting it fairly fast.
Evidence of the country's rapid development is obvious around the increasingly bustling capital, Vientiane. Compared with just a few years ago, this tranquil town has woken up to the 20th century and to the potential of tourism. But it's not throwing the gates wide open just yet. Instead, Vientiane is counting on attracting high-spending tour groups rather than penny-pinching budget travellers.
We would like to promote high-quality tourism.
Not looking for backpackers.
And limit for backpackers.
Limit or not, the government has declared 1999 Visit Laos Year and is targeting 1 million tourists a year by the year 2000. Since it caught on to tourism, arrivals have rocketed from less than 38,000 in 1991 to over 400,000 last year, although those figures include day trippers from Thailand. In the same period, the government says earnings from tourism have grown from just $2 million to over 43 million. The dramatic increase in tourism is largely due to this link with the outside world. Across the river is Thailand, and I'm standing in Laos. The Friendship Bridge was completed in 1994 and funded by Australia. Across it came a new wave of Thai foreign investment into Laos and a flood of tourists. Thailand now makes up over 50% of all foreign visitors. Some long-term residents warn that it could be on the way to swamping its neighbour's tourism industry.
There's a very real danger of that, and in many ways it's happened already, because most of the tours that come here are organized out of Thailand, and the Lao government has gotten very upset about that, and that they haven't seen their fair share of tourist dollars.
In the meantime, Laos is caught between cashing in on tourism while trying to preserve the charm that visitors come to witness for themselves. One thing that may put tourists off coming here is concern over safety. Late last year, a prominent tour operator was murdered on the road from Vientiane to the ancient capital, Luang Prabang. In tomorrow's report, I'll be looking at potential problems and how best to avoid taking risks. That's all for Business Class. I'm Andrea Catherwood. Last year, the international community here was rocked by the murder of the country's best-known tour operator, Claude Vincent. He founded Soda Tour, a French tour agency and the largest foreign operator in the country. Last September, he was gunned down along with 4 of his staff on the road from Vientiane to Luang Prabang. Vincent himself had warned tourists to avoid taking the overland route to Luang Prabang for fear of attack by bandits. It's advice he chose to ignore himself at the cost of his life.
It is a big loss for us because Mr. Collinson has more than 30 years in the tourist field, let's say. He is well known worldwide, and he is one of the founder of Soda Tour. That we have suffered a big loss.
And outside observers say Vincent's death is a setback to the development of responsible tourism in Laos.
He was just a an intelligent voice within the planning of tourism, and once those voices disappear, then the demands for the sort of the quick money start to be heard louder.
Despite the high-profile murder, the government continues to insist the road to Luang Prabang is safe.
This event is very rare, which occur in our countries. Very rare.
Would you advise tourists to take that road from Vientiane to
Yes,
Luang
now
Prabang?
it's sure already. Our government promote.
Soda Tour says otherwise.
The road from Vientiane to Luang Prabang is forbidden for the foreigner to travel.
And residents say the government's reluctance to release accurate information only adds to people's fears.
The whole problem is there's not very much accurate information available to the public. So I can't say one way or the other what the problem is, but personally, from what I've heard, I would be very nervous about driving to Luang Prabang. I'd much rather fly there.
But it's not just the threat of ambush which makes travellers wary of taking to the road. Laos has an unenviable place in the record books as the world's most heavily bombed country per head of population. During its so-called secret war with the communists, the US dropped over 2 million tons of bombs on Laos, equivalent to 300 kilograms per person.
Another way of looking at it, during the 9 years of the war, the equivalent of one B-52 load of bombs like this was dropped over Laos every 8 minutes around the clock every day for those 9 years. A lot of ordnance.
Taylor says the country is still littered with unexploded bombs.
I would say tourists will see bombs around the place. The thing is, don't worry too much about them. They probably won't go off. Just don't pick them up. Don't carry them. Don't try to take them home as a present for family or friends, because it could be the worst present you give them.
At present, business travellers looking for some added safety in Laos only have one option: the government-run Laos Security Services. Now other foreign security companies are moving to get in on the act. The pace of development may be speeding up in Laos, but Vientiane is still by far the quietest capital I've ever seen in Southeast Asia. Tomorrow we'll be having a good look around this peaceful and charming city. And that's it for Business Class. I'm Andrea Catherwood. There's no doubt it's turned the corner after waking up from a communist-imposed hibernation, but Vientiane still has to be one of Asia's most casual cities. With a population of just 400,000, it's difficult to think of it even as a capital, never mind a seat of power. But for both tourists and business travellers finished with their work, it's a blissful place to, well, just kick back and relax. You can always follow the example of the city's animals. The best way to get around the French-inspired streets is by bicycle. You can hire one at any hotel for just $2 or $3 a day. Famous landmarks are few and far between. The best recognised is probably the Pratuksai Monument, otherwise known as the Victory Gate. It was finished as recently as 1969, with the help of some cement paid for by the US, and originally meant to improve the runway at the city's airport. It's a popular place for a picnic or just a memorable snapshot. Also worth a look, the morning market, open all day despite its name. Here you can bargain for anything from antique opium pipes to traditional silk tapestries. And like its Vietnamese neighbour, Laos takes pride in its revolutionary history. Visitors wanting a look through Lao eyes should check out the Revolutionary Museum, housed, ironically enough, in an old French building. Well, if you're looking for a more relaxing way to spend the afternoon, you can't get much better than this. It's a natural herbal sauna. You can get rid of the stress in the steam room and then work on those tired muscles with relaxing massage. It's also a bargain, costing just $3 US for the afternoon's experience. This one at Wat Sok Palawang is a 15-minute bike ride from town. Vientiane has also come a long way in terms of accommodation. A few years ago, the Lane Chang was considered the city's best hotel. But the Soviet-designed establishment has been overtaken with the opening of several new hotels in town. Among them, the 233-room Novotel Belvedere, first opened in 1992 and renovated in 1995. But competition is heating up with the opening earlier this month of the Thai-owned Laos Hotel Plaza.
This new hotel will be one of our keen competitor, but then we are quite confident of maintaining a certain client base because of the fact that we are quite confident with our service here.
We can guarantee that we can do better.
Travelers can judge for themselves. Both hotels charge $120 for a double room. Le Parasol Blanc is set around a renovated colonial villa with an attractive open-air pool. Vientiane is also a gourmet paradise, with the hospitable Nam Phu Square in the centre of town home to a number of quality restaurants. Among the best, Le Provençal, Nam Phu, and for exquisite local food, try Cua Lao. According to government figures, about 80% of tourists who come to Laos pay a visit to the ancient capital of Luang Prabang, and for many it's the highlight of their trip. So tomorrow we travel up north to see for ourselves. Please join me then. And that's it for Business Class. I'm Andrea Catherwood. Phnom Penh is ravished by war. Ho Chi Minh City is overrun with traffic. Hanoi has lost many of its historic buildings, and Bangkok is in a permanent state of gridlock. But thankfully, the sleepy town of Luang Prabang is as peaceful and charming as ever. Especially if you're up at sunrise to watch the monks make their way to one of the town's many temples. Luang Prabang was the Lao capital until 1563, when King Seta Talat moved the seat of power south to Vientiane. Since then, it's been little more than a quiet provincial town, but its combination of traditional architecture and colonial buildings built by the French earned it a World Heritage Site listing from the United Nations last year. But while observers celebrate that achievement, they also worry it might not be enough.
Without it, it'd be destroyed. So in that sense, it's very, very important. But I don't think it can save it, as it were. You know, I think it's in a sense it's almost too small. You know, there'll be a large part of the town will develop, you know, beyond that.
Others say Luang Prabang has to learn lessons from its neighbours.
I have met many tourists coming from Thailand, and when they visited Luang Prabang, some of them are crying because they say, we don't have this anymore. We used to have Chiang Mai, but we completely destroy it. And they say, please keep Luang Prabang as it is. Don't do as we did. We destroyed everything.
The local airport now has a new terminal to cope with increasing numbers of tourists, and the door is due to open soon to international flights from around the region. A French architect who helped achieve the World Heritage listing worries that development could undo the conservationists' efforts.
They will face a big problem of pollution because the takeoff is really right on the city, more or less.
But in the meantime, the town's easygoing atmosphere is quite bewitching. Tourists should get a bike for a couple of dollars a day and take a tour of the town's pagodas. Out of over 30 dotted around town, this is the one that's considered the must-see attraction. It's Wat Seng Tong, the most important royal wat in the city, dating back to the mid-16th century. But the most impressive view of Luang Prabang comes from up here on Mount Pusi by the Royal Palace. Or take a boat trip on the Mekong River. You can negotiate your fare to Paco Caves just over an hour away. Accommodation is cheap and reasonable. Try Villa Santi, a welcome addition to the town's hotels when it opened in 1992. An older choice is the Relais de Luang Prabang, converted from an old royal residence, also known as the Savannah Pum. Elsewhere, the Muang Luang Hotel opened just a year ago. And one other attraction, not to be missed, Luang Prabang's river bars, perfect places for a cold beer lao while the sun sets on the Mekong. And although Laos has to be one of the most alluring travel destinations in Asia, no one's saying it's easy, nor is it particularly cheap. In tomorrow's report, we'll be giving some practical advice on everything from getting a visa to getting around, so join me then. And that's it for Business Class. I'm Andrea Catherwood. A big part of the charm of this country is that it's so undeveloped compared to other places around Southeast Asia. But that makes getting into Laos and then getting around once you're here something of an adventure in itself. Just take a look at the travel advice offered by the US State Department when it comes to Laos, easily found on the Internet's World Wide Web. It includes the following warnings. 1. Persons travelling overland in some areas run the risk of ambush by insurgents or bandits. 2. Medical facilities are limited and don't meet Western standards. The blood supply isn't screened for HIV or AIDS. 3. Local police sometimes confiscate passports in the case of business disputes or visa matters. Keep up to date on State Department info by checking this address. We had our own hassles trying to board a domestic flight from Luang Prabang to Vientiane. It's a good idea to have some small change handy to help the immigration officer find that all-important stamp. Even tour operators agree getting around Laos is not for the faint-hearted.
There are many difficulties right now to pass. And the road, for example, is not so good. And also we lack the accommodation, something like that. So coming to Laos, that is the soft adventure, let's say that, not for the comfort and not for the lux, something like that. And you have to prepare to face any difficulty it will be occur.
When it comes to visas, travellers have a few choices depending on the purpose of their journey. Tourist visas are generally valid for 14 days with the option of extending for another 15 once you're actually in Laos. They vary in cost, but most include at least 2 nights accommodation, and you have to pay extra for the package deal most tourists end up buying. A transit visa is cheaper, but it restricts travel to the area around Vientiane and is only valid for 5 days. Business visas are also cheap, but you need a letter of sponsorship from either an individual or a company registered in Laos. And the government isn't in any rush to simplify the visa process.
For making easier the visa for foreign visitors, we try to do step by step, not in one time.
When it comes to cash, the local currency, the kip, is interchangeable with both the Thai baht and the US dollar. Current exchange rates are stable at roughly 1,000 kip to the dollar. There are now plenty of banks, mostly Thai, where tourists can change travellers' checks. It's best to bring them in US dollars. But credit cards are accepted in city hotels and restaurants. Any travelling you do outside of Vientiane is far quicker and safer by plane. A round-trip ticket to Luang Prabang costs just over $80 US. Lao Aviation flies at least twice a day, but with travellers wary of taking the road, flights are usually busy, so book early to guarantee a seat. Or if time isn't an object, there's a network of boats which travel at their own leisurely pace up and down the Mekong River. So whether you come here as a business traveller or as a tourist, with a little bit of forward planning, you should have a smooth trip. You'll certainly take away some unforgettable memories. And that wraps up our On Location series of reports from Laos. For Business Class, I'm Andrea Catherwood.